Welcome to episode 3. This one's going to be intentionally a little bit lighter because we've been solving the world's problems for the last 2 episodes. So we're going to have some fun and look forward to some of the stuff that we obviously enjoy reading about and talking about. And that is also relevant to other people that are running businesses, but that's AI. Obviously very topical for everybody, whether you're obviously implementing it commercially or not, but a very fast-moving target for all of us, and I think each of us has done some work with it as well, applying it to our unique businesses. So a really interesting topic that is obviously going to evolve a lot over the next few years. So who wants to kick off with their sort of top high-level view of AI for anyone listening, whether they're veterans at this point or people that have kind of dismissed it and haven't really looked at it? Anyone feel strongly about it?
Well, you want to start, Andrew?
Yeah, Mike, why don't you start?
I'll just kick it off.
Kick it off.
I don't think anyone can enter a room without, at some point, a conversation about AI coming up. I was in several meetings yesterday, and all 3 of them, AI came up in the conversation. So, it's definitely the hot topic right now, hence why we're taking this on. And there's a lot of areas we can go with this. I'll just start it off by saying, there's a lot of different people on the adoption curve of AI. Everyone is using it very differently at the moment. You talk to some individuals that are still using it at the base function where they're just using it, prompting it as a chat through the chat engine and doing basic tasks with it. And obviously those individuals, like someone made a joke the other day, they're like, oh yeah, so you're on version 2023 of AI utilization. They're like, we're a little bit past that now, but everyone's different, right? Everyone's using it different. Some people are building models. I think what would be a good area to talk about is kind of like we'll talk about some of the large language models that are out there. Like my question, and I'm always asking Kyle and Andrew this, as a user of AI, what is the ideal model for me based on a specific task? Because there's a bunch out there right now. You have OpenAI's model. We have Google's Gemini. Google has various models, but Gemini is the hot one right now. We have Anthropic's Claude. And everyone I talk to is using a different model. And some are saying they love it, but then you dig deep into what they're using it for. And I think that's kind of determining what is the ideal model for an individual, a person, or a business to use based on what they're trying to achieve. So why don't we talk a little bit about that? Let's go into the large LLMs, what the differences are between them, what they're really good at, and we can all kind of chime in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure.
No, yeah, that makes sense, Mike.
Start high level, and then we could talk about application later. But I don't think we'll have time to dive into the application of AI in 40 minutes.
Yeah, I think it'll dovetail a bit with the discussion around like what all these different models are doing. And I think from my perspective, especially with recent news of the DeepSeek model, so R1, which is essentially their reasoning model, it's really looks like it's rattled a few people in the large, we'll call it like the sort of the alpha class of LLM. So OpenAI, like you mentioned, Google, Anthropic. I would throw xAI in there, Elon's company as well. They're throwing a lot of resources at Grok. And anyways, what DeepSeek has effectively shown is that you can get pretty close or even exceed in certain benchmarks doing it yourself. You don't need to spend tens of billions of dollars or have billions and billions of dollars of investment to actually execute and train these foundation models to be very, very competitive. And I think it's surprised a lot of people, myself included. And this is, again, it's unique to what I would call these sort of foundation models, which was very large data sets, tons and tons of training compute, huge amounts of power in order to create this sort of starting point or foundation. And then the inference side, or the ability to use it in different ways, is I would sort of say where the specialization really comes in, because like this R1 model from DeepSeek, it's designed really for a specific type of use case, complex reasoning, and it's got multiple steps throughout. So I would look at that very differently than a model that I would look at for, let's say, querying the internet. So if I wanted to do a bunch of research and I wanted it to summarize some static, data online, it doesn't necessarily need to, calculate anything. It's not, it's not a hardcore research sort of query. It really is just pulling some data and contrasting it. So there are very different models, much smaller models, much less resource intensive, that would do different tasks. So I think I would group them initially in those two different buckets, proprietary, large alpha houses, and then also what is the task at hand? If it's open source, can you do something locally on your machine that, does the task for you?
And then maybe we can bridge into agents, because now I see on my OpenAI that I have access to Operator, of course at a handsome price to utilize it, but Operator's out now, the first iteration of it anyways. What do you think, Andrew?
Yeah, like I think you guys brought up a few very important models that we all encounter on a regular basis. I see the future as essentially not being one model that kind of rule them all. Like it's gonna essentially be. I see a future where essentially we use different models for different purposes, and these models can interact with each other. And I think that's where the power and the strength of each model is going to really come to surface. Like for example, Google Gemini is able to handle significantly more token. Like they can handle right now, I think the limit is like 1 million token that they can handle.
And what does a token translate into? Like, is that a number of letters, words?
Yeah, number of characters. Characters that can get passed into the model. So essentially, Google can ingest a significant amount of data. Whereas, like there's certain limitation that exists with, say, OpenAI, ChatGPT, right, through their API. So basically, what I'm seeing is that there's going to be interaction between these things. Like we might use Gemini for processing large amount of data and then passing that information on to another model that's more capable of putting them together in a fashion that is we're used to, right, or that's most useful for us, right? So the interaction between the interaction between these models are going to be, I think, the future.
Well, you two both work with software developers. Like both of you work very closely with software developers that report into you. Which model do you think is more? I know this is a loaded question. Which model do you think is more capable for writing code, reviewing code? Like I personally heard Gemini is phenomenal with code, and it's getting better and better. But what are your thoughts on that? Like, what are your developers utilizing? Are they using any of these LLMs to help them code, assist them? Are they using other tools that are powered by AI?
Yeah, so I guess I can start. So I would consider myself a novice coder. So I picked it up in the last few years. But I had been playing with stuff like Linux since I was a kid. So it's not to say that I didn't know my way around technology to begin with. But I think I would be the perfect sort of use case in terms of the LLMs really expedite the learning curve. So for the most part, I use right now Sonnet, which is Sonnet 3.5, which is an Anthropic product. And it's tied in through an application, an IDE called Cursor, which is essentially using via Microsoft's VS Code as a backend, similar to like the Chromium browser. And then they've built essentially native AI workflows on top of it so that you can chat with an AI. It can also just create what they have is a composer function where you give it a bunch of instructions essentially, and it will iterate. It will create files for you. It'll code those files. It'll debug linting errors and all sorts of stuff. It isn't. I can't say that it's perfect. Like there's I guess for really simple applications, and depending on the language you're using, if there's a lot of resources online, they do better than other languages that are a bit more esoteric. So for example, I do a lot of Svelte front end, and Svelte just went through an upgrade from 4 to 5 in the last few months. And as a result, and there were some pretty massive changes between the syntax of the two, as a result, the models just they don't navigate that transition very well. Whereas if you're using something like C, where there's a ton of resources online and it's pretty static in terms of the syntax and the libraries and so forth, it does a lot better, or Python for that matter, because it's so prolific. it does a lot better at actually, one-shotting, if you like creating some code that's very, very close to perfect or functional at least. So I found it to be an absolute game changer. It definitely improves productivity, especially for novices or beginners like myself. And I know from some of the devs on our team, it's definitely like the chat functionality especially can be quite useful, where it's more of a theoretical evaluation rather than actually writing or executing the code. So structuring, different API routes and stuff like that is also quite interesting. The fundamentals, it can get those quite good as well.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't speak to that as much as Kyle, obviously, because I don't do any developing myself. But yeah, like I do see the tools. Like I've recommended Cursor to our developer as well, and I know Mike, you've also ended up recommending the same thing. And it's interesting because these are the kind of tools that are bridging the gaps, right? Between a junior developer and a senior developer. Brings up an interesting conversation that I had the other day with one of my friends who's also a developer. I asked him the question. I'm like, what's going to happen to developers if this is going on? It's just, and I think, essentially the senior developer has to become much better at utilizing AI for debugging, right? They're going to have to utilize AI for debugging because I think it's going to do an excellent job at that. And two, the junior developers, they're going to have to either level up to essentially use AI to help them become more senior developers, or get to that level, or it's going to be very difficult for them to compete in the marketplace, right? So overall, in terms of development, AI has definitely improved the productivity to develop software. As for which model is best at that, I think it's essentially right now what I've heard people utilizing is OpenAI's, what is it, the O1 model. I heard it's very good at that, but what's going to be very interesting, and it's going to come out very soon, is the O3 model. Apparently the reasoning is far superior from O1, and that's going to really be a big game changer and a threat to a lot of developers. Right.
And just to circle back, that's interesting, Andrew. And to circle back on these different platforms and the tokens, you mentioned the token allocation. Most of the pro level, like Gemini Pro, I think is $20 a month. Claude, Anthropic's Claude is also $20 a month. And Grok, I'm just looking it up now, Grok Premium Plus is $16 per month. How does that compare to OpenAI? I know that if you get to the pro level, I hear it's quite costly. Like, what is the cost to go to OpenAI's?
Pro level is about $200 a month.
Why so much more? I think 10 times the cost.
Yeah, it's really the access to the O1 model because there's a limitation from the $20 plan to the $200 plan. There's a limitation on how often you can use the O1 model. So, and I think the future is that they're planning to roll out new features such as the agent, the operator, to the people that have the $200 plan. So they're going to roll out newer feature, more, I guess that requires more computing power, and so essentially they're charging more for it, which I think could be reasonable. You use AI a lot, right? And these are very groundbreaking features we're talking about. Like probably the pro access is going to give them access to the O3 model right when it comes out, and it's probably the limitation, the number of tokens allowed is probably going to be higher as well. So I think it's just a matter of how often you're going to use it and for what purpose. But even the current model that everybody have access to that are paid is so strong already for the regular public that I think it's very few people will probably sign up for that more expensive. What do you think, Kyle?
Yeah, so I haven't played around with the Pro model yet. My understanding, and this is specific to O3, the release schedule for O3 is it's really designed for primarily like academic research or essentially like complex mathematical tasks. And the reason that they've created this $200 tier is that there is a small subset of users that are essentially hitting the limit of their compute resources within that $20 plan. And so they've created a $200 plan to essentially say it's all you can eat. It's got essentially all the resources that are available to a user, and you can throw at it whatever you want. Now, the O3, I believe the O3 API hasn't been released yet, but it's essentially the level up from that. And they've compared benchmarks from, we'll call it low compute and high compute of O3. And high compute for O3 is thousands of dollars an hour in essentially compute resource costs. So it's really, sort of on the level of like a fractional sharing of a supercomputer within the AI sort of sphere. So it's very specialized. It's not something that I would anticipate anybody in the sort of general commercial space would ever need, but there's definitely, people that are testing it out and trying it and so forth. That's just, based on what I've read. The other thing that's interesting that's kind of going on behind the scenes for all of these developers or AI providers is there is a constraint on access to GPUs. And from my understanding, companies like OpenAI have signed agreements to work off of the hardware that's owned by Microsoft, their primary shareholder and investor. I guess they're not a shareholder because right now they're still a not-for-profit, but their primary investor, Microsoft, essentially have these large data centers with GPUs, and OpenAI is essentially, requesting usage of those resources in addition to Microsoft. So there's been challenges in terms of OpenAI resources in competing with Microsoft. Now, one of the recent releases is this conversation around Stargate, which is a joint venture between SoftBank, Oracle, and OpenAI, and it aims to essentially create these mega clusters of data centers, essentially to try and the dollar limit they put out there is $500 billion, $500 billion, which is a staggering amount for a data center, much less one that's dedicated to AI. But the whole reason behind that is that the industry is, for the most part, constrained by hardware resources. And I'm really curious to see what happens with Grok 3 when it is released, because from what my research has shown, the main bottleneck has been the ability to tie in more than, let's say, 40,000 GPUs for them to have coherence, or the ability to be essentially communicating with one another on the same sort of problem and being able to produce an output that is coherent across all of those GPUs. And for whatever reason, there was a hardware bottleneck and a cap to the number of GPUs that could function coherently. And somehow the team at xAI have been able to breach that limit, and they've essentially strung together 100,000 H100 GPUs. And Grok 3 is going to be the first product that is released that's a result of this large supercluster in terms of a foundational sort of training data set. So it's going to be really interesting to see the functionality that produces, because it's going to be the sort of leading edge of training models. And then from that point on, everybody's essentially playing catch up, buying more and more GPUs, throwing more and more resources at it to again try and push the envelope. So it already is very good. I would agree, and I think it's going to get exponentially better. I think there's been a lot of chatter around like, oh well, it's kind of plateaued. We haven't really seen major advancements, but we have to remember that, again, there's only so many GPUs to go around. There's also only so much time year upon year for these large companies to actually train and go through epochs of actual improvement before they can actually release market improvements on these models. So
very interesting. Any comment, Mike?
Yeah, well, I was going to say, like, Kyle's definitely passionate about AI. He's been doing his research. Let's talk about then. Let's shift gears into like how AI applies to small to medium size, even large organizations. If we go, maybe we'll stay in the medium size, because if we go large, we're gonna have to talk about governance. We're gonna have to talk about security, policy. Let's talk about medium-sized businesses and how they can start to utilize AI. Something came up in a group I was in yesterday, and it was I actually liked it. One of the leaders there ends every single meeting. They end the meeting off with, what is everyone at the end of the meeting, everyone has to state what they're going to use AI for. So they have to state, okay, these were the business objectives of the meeting. How am I going to try to utilize AI to work towards achieving any of the business objectives of this meeting? And everyone has to go around the room and state like what their goal is and how they're going to utilize AI. So basically, I think that what they're trying to get at is adoption. Is they're trying to get their employees comfortable with using AI, some level of AI. Obviously, there has to be some parameters around how they're using AI, and they're not putting you're not putting your financials, pumping it into an open model. But they really are encouraging, and I urge all business owners to encourage their employees to start getting comfortable with using AI. And I think we could speak to this because, at Boardwalk, Andrew and I are always empowering our employees to use the advantages of AI, because that is where things are going. And if you have this tool available to you, why wouldn't you want to use this tool? If you're trying to think about trying to put a roof on a house, with a hammer and a nail. If I have this drill or these special tools that I could put this roof on, why would I not use those tools? And if I don't use them, the next company is going to use them, and they're going to put on that roof faster, more efficiently, and before you know it, I'm going to be priced out of the game. So get your employees comfortable, just micro steps, have them start doing simple tasks using AI, introduce it to them, have them do simple tasks, and eventually you can even do training sessions. I think a lot of companies are starting to do that now, where they're doing training sessions on AI and AI specific meetings. What are your thoughts on that? Like, how can businesses implement AI at a base level?
Yeah, I think one of the challenge for us was, like the extra time it takes an employee out of their current existing workflow to go to AI, and then having that information flow back into their workflow. So it's an added step for a lot of them. So I think one of the area of focus that we've tried to do at Boardwalk is essentially integrating AI as much as possible into their existing workflow. Right, having the UI for it that ensure that it becomes seamless. A good example, I think, that we can all relate to, whoever uses Gmail, and I'm sure a lot of people, all of us use Gmail, is the recent feature that they push where it allows you to write an email directly from within that UI, where you essentially press some hotkey and it'll open up the AI that will assist you in writing it, and pre-program prompts. Right, certain requests, like if you want to extend the email, or you want to shorten the email, or you want to elaborate on it, there's pre-prompt that's now configured into a button. So I think this essentially speeds up the adoption and the integration into their workflow, right? Because that's essentially what gets them to easily use it. So those are the kind of things I would probably say would help employees utilize these kind of technology. What do you think?
Yeah, I would second that. I think one of the things that I'm most curious to see is actually very similar to that cursor example that I mentioned. So it's an existing tool that the entire industry or trade would be familiar with. And there are multiple versions of, an IDE or in a development environment, and they have their strengths and weaknesses. And the ability to implement AI across that sort of existing tool is really, I believe, going to be table stakes. So especially when it comes to software. So software generally is, kind of the leading edge tool in my mind, where it's taking processes or data that is, unstructured or whatnot, and doing it, structuring it in such a way or automating it in such a way that, again, it saves time or increases productivity. And, I think there's going to be fewer applications if you look at sort of the real world, like, constructing a building, for example. I don't know that a laborer holding a drill is necessarily going to be able to implement AI in their day-to-day workflow, but I think it will definitely solve problems and save time with respect to how that building is engineered, how materials are quantified, how things are ordered, how, obviously businesses transact things like, financing and insurance and so forth. And so I think it's important for the people that are selling and building those tools, if there's an ability for you to take advantage of AI to augment it, I think you really need to, because I think it's going to be table stakes going forward because of the things that it's so good at. And I'll give you one example that we're working with, and was a huge discovery for us, and that is the ability for AI to synthesize and ingest huge sums of data. You could look at this in all sorts of different fields, from legal cases or financials or whatnot. But the ability to essentially ask a plain language bot to analyze, let's say 30,000 documents instantly, and produce a bunch of conclusions or a bunch of literal search outputs is incredibly powerful. And I think we've all heard examples of some of these large, let's say deep learning model from Google putting together massive, let's say, merger and acquisition plans that had previously taken a consultant a couple weeks of man hours. Now they're putting it together in, let's say, 15 minutes of compute time. So, there's some absolutely staggering advancements that are taking place. And I think if you can latch on to the things that it's really good at and will continue to get better at, and utilize that within your existing workflows or your existing products, I think that's going to be a real game changer.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of people should be trained on this new, area where it's, we all talk about it, prompt engineering, right? It's really about who can come up with the best prompt. And like what's interesting is Michael and I we're just in the office, and we hear the younger people, they're coming up with some really smart prompts. That hey, sometimes you don't think about it. And I think this is an area that is going to grow because the smarter the prompt, the better the prompt. You can pre-program those prompts to a button and send those, send that out and get a prompt back. It's just I think the area of prompt engineering is going to be really big over the next couple of years. Is essentially how they utilize AI and how they can extract the most value out of AI, and that's going to be the game changer and the winner here.
Yeah, so I'm curious your guys' thoughts on some of the doomsayers, so the people that say that AI is overblown. Like, I think we all kind of share similar views that it's productive and it helps us in some ways. What would you say to the people that especially are commenting publicly on stuff like LinkedIn to say it's all hype, it's overblown, it's never going to go anywhere, it doesn't matter?
Those individuals need to get in touch with reality.
I guess they need to start using it clearly.
No, the argument I've heard, okay, the AI is definitely not going anywhere. It's going it's going really fast and really far. But there's some people do make the argument that it's dangerous and that it's gonna, I've just had this argument with a few individuals over the last month, how it can give tools to people that have ulterior motives, like ill-intentioned motives, and give them the tools to, you can replicate people, you can imitate people, you can replicate websites, you can create phishing emails, phishing landing pages, you can ask it for plans on how to commit certain crimes. Like these are the examples people were bringing up. Also, the authenticity, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate. Right now, they're saying 70% of individuals can differentiate between something that's generated by AI versus human generated, but that differentiation is narrowing very quickly. So at some point, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate what was created by a person and what was created by a machine, AI. So that's some of the arguments I'm hearing, and I understand it definitely has its dangers with anything. Like when the World Wide Web came out, it's no different. It's an amazing tool. It can be used for good or for bad. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you. I agree with you. I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, listen, it can be very dangerous. So I think, first of all, we're solving a major problem. We're opening up some, basically, as we solve problems, new problems are arising, right? And I think that the set of problems that are coming up now, and something that I think we collectively and around the world we haven't really thought about, is identity. And I think internet identity right now, you're thinking about it, is really managed by some of the big players like Google, Facebook. These are the massive corporations that are managing our identity. I think that essentially is going to have to change, because slowly AI are going to encroach on that. Like we need to have almost like a sovereign identity on the internet somehow, right? Like something to prove that we are who we are, not because I have a Gmail account, right? But like because I exist and I live in this country, with an ID. This is kind of like required to prevent fraud, to prevent identity theft that can occur. Because now AI is capable of replicating. I might be AI right now. Like it can replicate my voice, my image, my gesture, everything, and the tone of voice. It's just going to get more and more advanced as more and more data of myself gets onto the internet. So how can you prove this identity? And I personally think that one of the biggest thing that they can utilize is utilizing blockchain, obviously, to solve this problem, right? Because you look at some of the innovation that happened in that space, it kind of really resolved that problem for money and things like that can be applied now. Can be that use case can be modified to fit identity. Right, and prove authenticity and things like that as well. So it's going to be very interesting to see how the amalgamation of these two large space right now and up and coming, and how it's going to come together and solve this big problem.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because I definitely have heard the inverse of that, which is the concern around sort of governmental administration and like public IDs and stuff like that, where people definitely have concerns. And I understand the argument around sort of, like government social score, social credit, that kind of stuff, where you essentially have a public ID that represents you as an individual online and through a bunch of transactions. And the concern is that it's a slippery slope where it may be useful for proving provenance of something, certification or whatever of your thought leadership or things that you've done. And then it could be obviously taken advantage of, and to say, well, we're going to start rating that. And if you don't have a certain rating or you don't fall into a certain group, certain services are going to be restricted to you. So I definitely think, and this comes back to what Michael said about like, you could take any tool and there's going to be nefarious purposes and there's going to be honest purposes. And I think I'm definitely in the camp that I don't think it's enough of a concern for us to artificially limit developing these tools. I do think it's, to your point, like I think it's one of the major challenges when we really can't determine the source of content and whether or not it's authentic. And it's going to be really fascinating to see the next couple generations deal with that, and whether or not they take the perspective that we're just going to shut it down and get rid of it, or we're going to try and find ways like cryptography to try and keep track of it and trace it back to the legitimate, honest source of that data.
Yeah, if we go the route of that digital ID, that is, it's a slippery slope. We have to be careful, because once we go down that alleyway, there's no coming out of it. It's just, that's it. And I do remember there was lots of talks about that potentially coming down the pipeline, or that was the goal.
Yeah, like it's not to say that we're going to centralize the whole thing. It's a matter of this. If we go down that rabbit hole, it's going to be decentralized versus centralized, right? Like what I'm saying is, essentially, maybe there is a decentralized way of managing identity, that we truly own our identity, right? Like we can prove our own identity. Because right now, it's funny because our identity is managed by some sort of centralized entity. Like my driver's license is with the government. My online identity belongs to Google and Facebook and and so on. So I don't really own my own identity. If you think about it, you don't own that either. So who are you? If I don't know you, how are you going to prove yourself that you are Kyle, you are Michael?
Added to the list of things we don't own. I don't really know what we own, to be honest.
Getting philosophical here.
Yeah. But reeling it back in very high level, if you're a business owner, you have a business, you need to get on this. Like you're going to definitely be falling behind the curve if you're not utilizing, your staff's not utilizing it. There's a million ways you can utilize it. So if we were to give some advice to someone that is just really surface level on AI, someone like Michael Malfa, What kind of advice would you give this individual? Where should he start to use AI for his business?
I'm
Use,
gonna
use
I'm
a
gonna go
broad
first on
business.
this one. First, pay for a pro subscription on something. So you're basically gonna open up your, not the $200 OpenAI one, like the $20 one, okay? And now you're gonna have access to a much better model. You're gonna have access to better tools, and just start playing with it. Start prompting it in different ways, and then you're gonna see the results. And you're gonna find that different prompts give different results, and you're going to start learning more about how AI function, how and when it hallucinates, and how to avoid and how to overcome some of these things, and just learn how to interact with it. You guys might laugh, but sometimes I open up OpenAI in my car and I talk to it. I have a quick brainstorming session with this thing, and just learn how it works and how it responds to me. Now, the next time I'm going to deal with it, I'm going to know how to get the best out of it, to extract the most value out of this AI. So that's my advice. Play around with it. Don't be afraid. Spend the $20 because it's a great technology. Spend $20, learn from the better model.
So Andrew's advice is to make it your friend and have late night long conversations with it. What about you, Kyle?
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. No, I think I would take maybe a really beginner approach would be think about the top 5 things that you want to do with your business. So one of those is probably related to revenue, cutting costs, new markets, new products, all that kind of stuff. And then before you implement Andrew's workflow, enter one of them, use one of them for free and say, this is what I want to do. What are the best models to use for this? So the reason I say that is that just like we were talking about earlier, if you wanted, for example, something to produce a bunch of images because you needed to do a bunch of marketing copy, it would be a very specific type of model. And if you're using one and it's not doing a very good job, you might be disappointed. So I think the models themselves would actually be a good resource to help you research what's out there and what they can do. And again, the associated costs and commitment and stuff like that. Likewise, and then once you have that and it sort of dovetails with what you've been trying to do with your business, like Andrew said, just try it. If it's, you could go, jump in with both feet and, trial a piece of software, for example, that's automating your CSR, your sales process, whether it be, crafting customized emails or creating outbound campaigns, or all the way to there's now AI tools that allow you to essentially create a call center or an AI-based sales call team. So there's all sorts of sophisticated ways you can go. It's really about identifying what are your priorities and then figuring out the best tools to help you along that journey.
Yeah, that's really good. So you use AI to figure out how to use AI. I like that. I like that. But yeah, tying it to the business goals and objectives is very important. And, if you're using AI in a leadership role, I think that's very important, is making sure that, you're at the end goal is what is the business objective and how can I utilize AI to achieve that or to help me achieve that. And also, like, what are some of the bottlenecks in the business? Like, if you get, that's high level, but if you go a little bit more grassroots into the weeds, in between what both of you are saying, you can kind of see where those friction points are and where you're spending a lot of human resource hours on things that can easily be achieved by a predictive algorithm like AI. So yeah, definitely lots of ways you can use it. It's endless and it's exciting. I think once you start, there's no stopping.
Don't be afraid to use it. I find a lot of the time, what's interesting is people are like embarrassed to use AI in some ways. Like, oh, this thing was created by AI. No, I think, listen, use it, produce the content, produce those things, even if it's AI. What I think what's impressive, what people should be proud of is that, hey, I've used AI to generate, good contents. And I think that's something people should be proud of rather than being embarrassed. Hey, I used AI for this. Oh, you've used AI for this. Don't care about that stuff. Just use it, produce the best content. And I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, I think you touch on an interesting point, which is I think it goes without saying that you can't just copy paste whatever it produces as well. Like, you need to have your wits about you in terms of what it is that you want to produce. Like, coming back to the software example, there's no question that, the vast majority of it, the AI output, needs to still be reviewed and tweaked and updated, but it does still save the time. Like, I wouldn't say that the amount of effort that it requires to correct it or to refine and revise it makes it therefore not worthwhile. I think that it still is worthwhile. You just need to be, conscious of the fact that it's not going to be perfect. And I would definitely caution the people that say, well, if it's not perfect, then why would I care? If it makes mistakes, like, isn't this, too much of a risk or more of a headache than it's worth? And I would say it's probably not, as dramatic as you think, especially if you're using it over, hundreds or thousands of iterations, whether that be copy or graphics or whatever, or code. And so again, just get started with it somewhere. And like we talked about with context windows and prompting and stuff like that, like, you can get better at it and the outputs will get significantly better once you start to learn how to use the tools and how they respond and so forth. And something simple as part of the prompt, you could sort of say to the model, here's the instruction. If you have any clarifying questions, be sure to ask them to me. And the model will actually ask you clarifying questions if it needs, if it wants to confirm something. So there's all sorts of little hacks and tweaks that you'll get used to as you start using them that will make the output a lot better.
Awesome.
It's good, great.
Well, I'm gonna have I'm gonna call my best friend ChatGPT after this and have a discussion.
A post-podcast discussion about what we discussed here with AI.
You could feed it the podcast and say, like, how would you rate this episode? Scale of 1 to 10. What could we do better? It'll tell you, honestly. It'll rate it. It'll give you a bunch of constructive feedback. We should post it. We'll post it in the show notes.
Yeah. We'll see how critical it really is.
Yeah, it's probably going to rip me apart here. It's like that guy, Andrew.
I don't think our egos can support that, Kyle. All right, gentlemen, that was awesome. Let's do another episode on AI. I think we can go a little deeper, but for, to be conscious of time, I think we got to run here. But I'll let you close off, Kyle. I like how you close off these podcasts, and then we'll be back at it next week.
Yeah, nothing to say. Let's wrap it there, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks, all.
Thank you.